on your machine and you notice something about the costume doesn't work, what's your next step?
First I get really mad. No, usually I spend a lot of time thinking about that, but it does happen. Sometimes it's just beyond your control. A lot of times I spend hours pulling things apart and doing it again. If I'm lucky, I can keep using what I've been using, but sometimes maybe the fabric just isn't working, or my machine just decides it doesn't like it and has eaten a giant hole in it. I always try to buy more fabric than I need just in case. Luckily with cosplay, it's not as serious as theater. If I really screw up a costume, I can put it off to the next convention and I'll figure it out in the meantime. I'd rather be able to go to a con and not stress that my costume screwed up and just put it off than try to get something done the night before and wear something that I know isn't my best work. So it depends on what the problem is, but there are ways to problem solve.
And so for the Sailor Mercury, you had a pretty nice skirt. Is that kind of you just got a regular pattern and made it?
That pattern actually was from a friend of mine. If you've seen the pictures of me with the Sailor Scout group, the one who's Sailor Moon, Olivia, she runs Olivia's Atelier. It's her pattern that she adapted from someone else's pattern. And basically it's 4 circle skirts put together. So literally, we cut 4 circles of fabric and made them into one giant circle of fabric. So that's how you get all those big pleats, because there's so much fabric. But yeah, it's not really a pattern, it's more circle skirts are math. So you just figure out how long you want it and how big your waist is, and go from there, basically.
So you said right now you're at this theater place. So you're holding off conventions for a while, and I would assume? Or what's the next one you're going to?
The next one I'll be at, or around, is Fan Expo. I haven't decided if I'm going yet, mostly because I get home a week before Fan Expo, and then a week after that is Dragon Con in Atlanta. So I might hold off on Fan Expo just so I know that I'm good to go for Dragon Con, but yeah, I'm starting to miss the convention scene. I am working on some cosplay stuff while I'm here. If I didn't, I think I'd go crazy, but yeah, there's a lot of opportunity for me to dress up. Like, we did a zombie night a couple weeks ago where I got to do my face up, and so there's definitely things for me to do, but I do miss it. I miss the scene. I'm really excited to get back into it, and I knew that coming here, but I am doing 40-hour work weeks of making costumes, so it's not like I'm at a loss for making costumes.
So you go to one of these conventions, and what's kind of the first thing you do in the door?
The first thing I do?
Yeah.
If it's a small convention, I'm probably setting up my booth. If it's a big convention, I pretty much run straight to the dealer's room. I like to scope out what I'm going to buy through the weekend, so I know how diminished my bank account's going to be by the end of the weekend. Usually I look for stuff on Friday and I buy stuff on Sunday. And a lot of my friends usually run dealers' booths, so I'll jump to their booths and say hello and make sure I've seen everybody and let everyone know I'm there. But yeah, usually it's the dealer's room. I'm a bit of a shopaholic at conventions.
So is there something that you brought from home that kind of reminds you of your geekness, as it were?
Honestly, it's my notebook that I take to work. It's a Game of Thrones notebook, and it's the Night Watch Oath. I didn't really have much room in my suitcase, but the other thing I did bring, and it doesn't look like much right now, but I'm working on it as I can. I'm actually working on a beard. You can kind of see the shape of it. For Thorin Oakenshield from The Hobbit. So I brought that, and that's the thing I work on when I have time, which I don't have a lot of. But yeah, I've got my notebook, I've got a couple books with me, and I've got my beard, so
Are there any comic books that you brought to kind of soothe your...
No, because I didn't want to ruin them.
So is there a particular superhero you're reading right now?
We're reading Nova.
No. Did you get turned on to that by Ultimate Spider-Man, or?
No, actually, my friend Brett got me into it. I had seen, not that long ago, someone did a really, really good Nova costume, and I got talking with Brett about that costume, and he said, "Oh, I've got all these comic books, you should read them." So now I'm going to be reading those. But I'm also reading Game of Thrones now, that the most recent season is done, so I have a lot of geeky, nerdy stuff to keep me busy.
There's a lot of new Game of Thrones kind of cosplays out there. Are you looking on doing something in that realm, or?
Yes. Had I not been in Banff this summer, it probably would have been done by now. But I'm actually making Tyrion Lannister for myself. Based off the show, I can't really cut off my nose or anything. Spoiler.
It's always prosthetic, right?
Yeah. But we have a very large Game of Thrones group that about 10 friends and I are working on. So we've got all the Lannisters, most of the Starks, and other people. So yeah. But I get to be Tyrion. I went to the exhibit and I saw the actual costumes for Tyrion, and I would fit in the armor. The only difference is my legs are too long.
So did you go there and take notes and look at the fabric? And
I got as close as I could to the fabric without actually touching it. I think I was freaking the security guards out a bit because I was like this, looking at some of the breakdown and the detailing and things like that.
So talk about some of the detailing. Like Sailor Mercury's bow must have not been that easy.
I actually failed catastrophically on my first attempt at the bows. Olivia gave me measurements of what they should sit at, and I kind of shrunk them down a little bit because I know I'm smaller. That's the thing I also have to do, is keep in mind that I'm short. So I built these bows, and they were massive. They just looked massive and horrible and floppy, and I had to put so many snaps to keep them up. And eventually, I just said to Olivia, "Can you please make the bows for me?" So my new bows are actually made by her. She told me how she did them, and she puts plastic in them so they stay nice and full, but they're not huge and floppy. So she ended up making my new bows for me, but not for lack of trying on my part.
Is there a particular method you use to make the fabric seem stiffer? Because, like in your Power Girl and in your Sailor Moon, it seems kind of like a stiff, upright fabric.
Power Girl, not so much. I don't think there's any interfacing in there, but basically what you use to make something stiffer is called interfacing, and you can get really light weights, like medium weights, heavy weights, and then things that are like vinyl almost, like heavy plastic. And basically some of them you can iron on, some of them you sew on, and they just back your fabric and make it stiffer. So say I want to use like a really nice satin for my Sailor Mercury bows, but it's way too light and it's just going to flop. What I do is I would iron that plastic into it or sew that plastic into it, and that way I can get the look of the fabric that I want, but also keep the integrity of this big freestanding bow.
Talk about when you're start doing the costume and you kind of got it almost complete. What are some of the steps you take to make sure it's right at the end?
Well, when it comes down to it, it's all about checking your stitches. Detailing is something that, with cosplay at least, detailing is something that you can always come back to later. I mean, if I'm competing in a costume, I make sure that my detailing is the way I want it. But if I'm just wearing it for a day, usually I'm more concerned about, is my stitching gonna pop? Are there thread ends showing? Are my hems nice? Did my stitches skip at all? Because for bodysuits, for example, because I do a lot of those, machines tend not to like stretch fabric that much, and if you're doing a hem, it might skip, and that's gonna make things look either lumpy or bulky or come apart. So I always make sure that my seams are all reinforced, everything's the way it should be, clipped all the threads, because there's nothing worse than putting on your costume and having a big dangly thread going down your leg. And then you look at the photos later and you're like, no! So it's basically just cleanup, making sure things are crisp, things are nice, everything's ironed, and you put a good finish on things. You can always come back to details, but if you're wearing something and your stitches pop, that's not very exciting. It's exciting for other people, but it's not exciting for me.